I think I shared before that my wife and I lived in Kenya for a year, and one of the things that was kind of fascinating about our time there was, of course, learning about a new culture. And one of the things about the culture that kind of made us think all the time was, at least as Americans, was the preeminence in Kenya of relationship above everything else. In other words, in Kenya, the first reality in your life is that you are in relationship to a community. I mean, we have community here too, but we have lots of rules and plans and order and schedules. In Kenya, those things don't matter so much as the relationship. And because the relationship kind of trumps everything in Kenya, you're expected to open your life and your schedule and your hospitality to that community pretty much anytime the community needs you. And like I said, that need to honor the relationship trumps almost everything else. There would be times where, in Kenya, you're really supposed to respect your elders and honor them. And so we might be walking somewhere and we needed to do something, but an old lady of the village might want to talk to us. And in Kenya, you don't go like this to tell someone to come. You go like this. This means come over here. And they call them shows. An old lady's a show. And if they said if a show went like this, you went. You don't ignore the show. You have to go if a grandma says come over. Or in Kenya, when you're making, they'd make like some rice and some stew. That would be kind of a normal meal. And if they were making that, and as long as they weren't too poor, they would always make extra, even if they were poor actually, because Uncle so-and-so may show up for a meal. And if they do, they don't have to tell you. You have to feed them. You have to be ready to show hospitality. But one time this really struck us was we were living in this orphanage with about 160 kids and the staff there. And what we learned over time at this orphanage is that sometimes groups, especially from America, from different churches, would come on through and, they'd be checking out the orphanage and maybe supporting it or whatever, bringing some stuff to it. And whenever a group from the outside would come in as a visitor, they would always feed them. And this is something I learned too. You always honor the relationship, and the main way you honor a visitor is by feeding them in Kenya. We have that here too a little bit, right? A lot of our gatherings, Thanksgiving turkey and 4th of July barbecue. But if it's sort of important there, here, it's profoundly important there. You have to feed people when they come to visit you. And so there was a time where a staff person from the orphanage stopped by our little apartment and said, some visitors from Pennsylvania are coming through, so we'd like you to go to the welcome meal. And we said, sure. When are they coming? Around lunch. Okay. So we were ready that day, and it came to be lunch, and we stopped by the kitchen area and the dining hall, and they're not here yet, and we think there's some travel delays, so we'll let you know when they're here. So, noon went by, and then the afternoon went by, and still no people. We check in, nope, they haven't arrived yet, travel issues. It got to be, dinner time, 6 o'clock, stopping by again, nope, they're not here yet, they really got delayed, okay. And pretty soon we're waiting around, it's like 10:30 p.m., it's getting late, and we just go back to our apartment, and we think, well, they'll probably come tomorrow, and we'll have some sort of, if they come really late, we'll have some sort of welcome meal for them tomorrow. So we go to bed and we fall asleep. We hear in the midst of our sleep a knock on our door, and we look at our clocks, and it's 3:30 in the morning. We're like, wow. And we go to the door, kind of stumble over, and here's a lady from the kitchen saying, they've arrived, we're having the meal. And we're like, it's 3:30 in the morning. And they're like, yes, we're having the meal. Okay. So we show up to this dining hall, and it was kind of this funny scene where these bewildered Pennsylvanians were like walking, they're so tired because they did have lots of travel delays, but there's this huge spread for them, and it's like, we're going to have a meal now. And you could see for the Kenyans, it made perfect sense to them. For the Americans, we were all kind of confused. And on the one hand, I think all of us kind of recognized deep down that this was a very nice, hospitable thing to do. But on the other hand, there was this other voice in us that I think was thinking, you're doing it wrong. This is crazy. You don't throw a welcome meal for tired guests at 3:30 a.m. But it's one of those experiences that's made me think over time. And one of the questions I've asked myself is, why was this event so shocking to me as someone from this area? And what I've come to realize is it was shocking because as much as we think we value relationship here, and we do many times, according to our cultural mindset, there are other concerns that often trump relationship in our culture. Sleep, for instance. Sleep trumps relationship sometimes. It would for me at 3:30 usually. Or to put it another way, schedule. We Americans, we like our schedules. We like things to be on time and under control. It's that the customer's always right. We want things to be the way we want it. And when things don't work out the way we think they should, we kind of fall into this judgmental legalism thing. That's not how you do it. This isn't right. You're doing it wrong. And of course, this mindset doesn't just affect sort of the way we live generally. It applies also to our religious mentality. The way we think about God, the way we think about religion. We like a God of black and white answers. It's so common that you'll have someone come and say, give me the answer. What's the simple answer? How does this work? I used to have a lady. She was a lovely lady in my prior congregation, but she'd ask me all the time, what happens when you die? Like, when do you get resurrected? Is it here? Is it there? And I'd always say, well, here are the different options. I don't know. But we want our answers. And, as Christians, because we want our answers, we come up with different answers. And sometimes we divide. We call ourselves the body of Christ. That came from St. Paul and Jesus. That's their language for what the church is. But look how divided it is because we have different answers. I mean, look how many Christian denominations there are, let alone other religions, but just Christian denominations. Actually, I was thinking about this and I said, how many Lutheran denominations just in our country are there? And so I Googled it, and if you can believe the internet, I found over 35 just Lutheran traditions in the United States. It's crazy. And what's ironic as Lutherans is that our tradition was founded upon the rediscovery of God's welcoming love. Luther had this commitment that Jesus Christ, when he looked in the Bible, was actually a God of grace. And God, this God doesn't demand us to be perfect and to have all the answers and to be worthy in order to love us and bring us together. And he rejected this kind of prevailing spirituality at the time in the church that said you have to jump through this spiritual hoop and that spiritual hoop to become acceptable to God. And it was a beautiful thing. It still is. It's a beautiful message. And yet within decades, there were all these splinter groups and different kinds of Lutherans and then different kinds of denominations because, we're dividing again and again over petty theological disagreements. You can go back and look at the old arguments. They'd argue about when exactly in communion does the body and blood become holy, become God's presence. Is it when we pour it? Is it when I say a prayer? Is it when you receive it? Is God in heaven at that time? Or, all this stuff that I don't know the answer. Do you? But people would have these vehement fights over it and divide. And, pretty soon, we Protestants, we replace the God who demands perfect spirituality and action, an action-based thing, into the God who demands perfect theology, perfect beliefs. We all have to agree. And as if believing in Jesus, as if being a Christian is mainly about the things we keep in our heads. It certainly wasn't about relationship above all. It was about being right. A number of years ago, I think, 15 or so, I was about to go to seminary, and people kind of knew it, and my home church that I'd grown up with invited me to go do a guest preaching thing. So I did, and it was nice. And I don't remember the exact topic of the sermon, but it was something about the wideness of God's mercy and sort of realizing that Jesus is there, not just in my group, but in other groups too. And after my sermon, I remember talking to this nice elderly woman who I'd known growing up. And she said, thank you for your sermon, Pastor. Growing up a Lutheran, the sense I had received was that only Lutherans go to heaven. And I'd been so happy to discover that this wasn't true, And to be fair, I wasn't the first one who said this. She had kind of, had that understanding over time. But I'd kind of been naive. I was blown away when she said that, that, wow, the church teaches that? And, since that time, I've learned over the last couple decades that, yeah, many of them do. Again, I wasn't the first to offer a compassionate picture of God. But, think about that fact that the picture of God she received in church as a faithful Christian was this judgmental God who was very happy to send Baptists to hell and Presbyterians to hell and Catholics to hell, let alone people from other religions, because they inadvertently believed the wrong things. I mean, it's crazy. We say God's like a father or a mother. Imagine having a father or mother that would reject you, alienate, become estranged from you because you didn't believe something right. It's like, you don't understand photosynthesis right. I'm going to, estrange myself. I'm kicking you out of the house because you believe something wrong. And all this is not to say that beliefs don't matter at all in faith. Of course they do. Jesus sometimes would debate people about beliefs. And in some ways, our understanding of God especially determines how we live, how we practice our faith. Nevertheless, when we look at the Gospels, we have to decide on what we see. What's the picture of God? Is it a God mainly of judgment and division? A God who wants us to divide over petty disagreements because we're right and someone else is wrong? Or is this a God who, even though he would talk about issues and have discussions, who ultimately brought together sinners from different walks of life, brought people together, and had a community that was mainly about love and forgiveness? Well, today we have another resurrection story. In our culture we think of Easter as a day. It is a day, but it's also a season. And we're having another one of these Easter stories. It's another story about one of his first few appearances to the disciples. And in this story, the disciples, some of them, are out fishing again, just like they were before they knew Jesus. It's kind of like, Jesus died and like, we'll just go back to fishing. So they're fishing. And Jesus appears to them on the shore, pretty far away. And it says he asked them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" And they answered him, "No." And he said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." And so they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it all in because there were so many fish, right? They have this tremendous haul of fish, which is kind of a reoccurring story. This happened before. And because this happened before, when they were first called, they recognized that this is the Lord. This is Jesus alive again. And then we get to this really funny part of the story, I don't know what to make of, where Peter is apparently taking a nap naked. I don't know why he's napping naked on the boat. No explanation given. But he's naked. He puts on his clothes before he gets in the water. He's so excited he can't even wait for the boat to come in, and he swims to shore. And, we have this reunion with Jesus. That's just beautiful, that just the passion of it and the kind of irrationality of his joy of just jumping in the water is so beautiful. And so they go and meet Jesus on the shore, and Jesus does an interesting thing. He doesn't say much initially. He's just sitting there with a little fire, cooking them some breakfast of fish. And there it is again. It's just like in Kenya, right? There may be lots to talk about, but first they have to eat together, right? A sign of hospitality, we're going to share a meal. And after that meal, if you think about it, if there was going to be a time for Jesus to rail into his disciples about being wrong, about losing faith during his crucifixion, about abandoning him, not understanding his teachings, even though he predicted his death, this was the time. This was the time to lay into them for having the wrong religious answers. But Jesus doesn't do any of these things. It's not about that for Jesus. It's not about, you didn't know all the right things. It's first and foremost about relationship. It's about love. And so Jesus comes along and asks Peter, "Do you love me?" And he lets Peter respond, "Yes, Lord, I love you." And he does this 3 times, just like the 3 times he denies Jesus. And, the way I read it is Jesus is letting him undo his betrayal, right? There's totally an open door for reconciliation. And so he lets Peter undo his failure so he can feel totally reconciled. But of course, the other part of this exchange is not just, "Do you love me?" But Jesus responds every time, "Then feed my sheep," or "feed my lambs." And I think the point of this, and it's a good thing for us to remember, is that this reconciliation with Jesus that he found, that we all find, isn't just about us. It's not just me and Jesus. Oh, I found Jesus. I'm saved. It's wonderful. Jesus doesn't let his repentance be just about him and Jesus. He expands it. There's a bigger picture. And it's basically this thing, which he literally said, "If you love me, then love others too," right? Not just some others either. Love all others, because all of these others are God's sheep, are God's lamb, are God's children. And so in the end, just like in Kenya, it was all about relationship. It was all about love. And pretty much, love trumped everything else. And what if this was the primary message that people experienced and heard in church? Instead of dividing over petty issues, instead of arguing over this or that, instead of being judgmental or having a checklist of, do you believe exactly what I believe? What if Christians were known by their love? What would happen? I suspect what would happen is exactly what happened in this story. New life and resurrection. Amen.
Amen.